84% toluene, 16% N-heptane, RON 101.8. These are not chemistry exam answers. This is the fuel composition Honda ran in the McLaren MP4/4 during the 1988 Formula One season. Same season Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost won 15 of 16 races. Same season the FIA tightened turbo regulations harder than any year before and watched Honda dominate anyway. Toluene is paint thinner. You can buy it at a hardware store. It is also a precursor to TNT. The Honda RA168E V6 Turbo did not just have a splash of toluene as an octane booster. The engine ran on paint thinner with a small amount of something resembling gasoline mixed in. Almost every documentary about 1988 frames this as a Senna-Prost story. Most engineering pieces frame it as a rocket fuel chemistry spectacle. Both framings miss what actually happened. The fuel chemistry was the answer. The question was a regulation Honda's engineers read more carefully than anyone else. 1988 was supposed to be the quiet end of the turbo era. Jean-Marie Balestre and the FIA had spent 3 seasons strangling turbo engines through progressively tighter rules. 1986 capped fuel at 195 liters per race. 1987 capped boost pressure at 4.0 bar. For 1988, both numbers got harsher, 2.5 bar of boost and 150 liters of fuel for full race distance. The intent was obvious. Naturally aspirated 3.5-liter cars had no fuel restriction. Turbo cars did. Balestre wanted teams to abandon turbos voluntarily before the formal ban in 1989. Williams had already given up and switched to a Judd Phi 8. Brabham had withdrawn from the entire season. Ferrari continued with its turbo, but spent most of the year fuel rationing. 6 teams ran turbos in 1988: McLaren, Ferrari, Lotus, Arrows, Osella, and Zaxspeed. Of those 6, 2 had Honda engines. McLaren had just signed Honda away from Williams. Lotus had been running Honda customer engines since 1987. Both teams ran the RA168E, a 1.5-liter V6 twin-turbo producing 685 horsepower at 12,300 revolutions per minute in qualifying, per Honda's own factory documentation. Most teams calculated that 150 liters was 25 to 30 liters short of what a competitive turbo would need to finish a Grand Prix. Ferrari's engineers, working with John Barnard, recommended a complete engine remap. The team ignored Barnard, struggled with fuel consumption for the first 9 races, and short-shifted at fuel-demanding tracks. By the German Grand Prix, Ferrari's racing power had dropped to 550 brake horsepower from a qualifying figure of 650. Honda did the math differently. FIA rules limited fuel volume. They did not limit fuel mass. They did not limit fuel energy. 150 liters, and what you put in those liters was your problem. Toluene has a specific gravity of 0.867. Conventional racing gasoline sits around 0.72 to 0.75. That difference matters when your container is fixed at 150 liters. A liter of toluene contains roughly 20% more energy than a liter of conventional fuel because there is more fuel per liter. Fill your tank with denser fuel, and you have effectively expanded your tank without touching the rules. Toluene's research octane number is 124. The 1988 regulations capped fuel at 102 RON. Honda's engineers calculated a blend of 84% toluene and 16% N-heptane. Heptane is the filler. Heptane has a research octane of 0, and Honda was using it specifically to drag the toluene's octane down to a measured 101.8, just under the regulatory ceiling, with a small cushion against post-race testing variation. The 84-16 ratio is documented in Honda's own corporate history, a decade of continuous challenge, a record of Honda's Formula One racing activities, ISBN 4-99002-6209. Ian Bamsey's 1990 technical book, McLaren Honda, Turbo: A Technical Appraisal, ISBN 08542984001, confirms the same numbers. The blend is also cited in a 2008 SAE Motorsports Conference paper that automotive technical writer Dennis Simonides covered in his July 2025 retrospective. McLaren's pit garage in 1988 reportedly smelled like a paint shop. Toluene fumes are pungent, slightly sweet, and headache-inducing. Pat Simmons, then Benetton's chief engineer, has described the eye-watering quality of working around Cosworth's similar fuel mix that year. Refueling in 1988 happened in open air, with mechanics standing inches from the cans. Nobody wore the full chemical-grade respirators that would be standard now. Toluene is classified as a probable human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Honda's mechanics, Lotus's mechanics, McLaren's mechanics, the Ferrari refueling crew, all of them spent that season breathing it. Whatever else the 1988 fuel rules accomplished, they sent every turbo team's pit lane straight into a chemical exposure problem nobody had thought to legislate against. A second engineering problem followed the fuel choice. Toluene does not vaporize like gasoline. The molecule is too dense and too viscous. At ambient temperature, toluene struggles to atomize properly through fuel injectors, and a poorly atomized fuel charge means incomplete combustion, hot spots, and detonation. The engine cannot run on raw toluene blends efficiently unless the fuel is preheated to roughly 70 degrees Celsius before injection. Honda's solution was a heat exchanger. They routed fuel lines through warm zones near the exhaust manifold, using waste heat from the exhaust system to bring fuel up to temperature before it reached the injectors. Renault had used a similar technique on the EF15B engine. Honda refined the implementation. The RA168E was, in effect, a fuel preheating system with an engine attached. There was more. Honda lowered the RA168E's crankshaft centerline by 28 millimeters relative to its predecessor, the RA167E. McLaren responded by designing the MP4/4 around that lower crankshaft, which let Steve Nichols and the recently arrived Gordon Murray push the driver into the laydown position that defined the car's silhouette. Frontal area dropped, drag fell. The whole package was built around what the fuel allowed the engine to do. 2 days into reading about this engine, I had a position. Honda had outsmarted everyone. The script was supposed to be about Honda's singular insight. It was not. By mid-1987, BMW had already been running high toluene blends in the M12/13 powering Brabham. Ferrari had reached 84% toluene by the end of 1988, according to AGIP fuel records cited by Luciano Nicastro, AGIP's head of R&D. The technique was not unique to Honda. It was an open secret across the paddock. What made Honda dominant was not the fuel choice. It was the engineering around the fuel choice. Other teams used toluene blends and spent the year fighting vapor lock and lean misfires and inconsistent power delivery. Honda's heat exchanger, preheating, ignition mapping calibrated for the slower burn rate of high aromatic fuel, and engine management software tuned for the 84/16 blend specifically meant Senna and Prost could run boost dialed up while Ferrari was running lean and braking early. The 1988 final standings: McLaren 199 points, Ferrari 65. The closest team scored less than a third of McLaren's total. McLaren took 15 wins, 15 pole positions, and 10 fastest laps. Senna and Prost lapped the field at multiple races. The only Grand Prix McLaren did not win was Monza, where Senna collided with Jean-Louis Schlesser 2 laps from the end while leading. There is a tempting story to tell here, in which the FIA, embarrassed by Honda's exploitation of the rules, retaliated by banning turbos. That story is wrong. The 1989 turbo ban had been announced in 1986, 2 seasons before Honda even refined the 84/16 toluene blend. The FIA was not punishing Honda. The FIA was trying to manage a transition Honda's engineers happened to win on the way out. What did change after 1988 was the fuel rulebook itself. Through the early 1990s, regulations tightened progressively to specify not just octane and volume, but hydrocarbon composition, density, and aromatic content limits. The fuel rules became the rules they should have been all along. The standard narrative of 1988 is the Senna-Prost rivalry, 2 of the greatest drivers of their generation in the same car, 1 championship between them. That narrative is true. It is also incomplete. The other narrative is that the FIA tried to kill Turbo F1 by capping the fuel tank, and Honda's engineers read the rules and realized the FIA had measured volume when energy was what mattered. Then Honda built the engineering around the loophole better than anyone else. Senna got the trophy, Prost got the runner-up check, Honda's fuel chemists got the championship,